stop settling for getting older when your body is actually crying out for balance. Most practitioners are stuck using outdated protocols that ignore how testosterone, estrogen, and cortisol interact in your 50s. Today, we are revealing the science of hormonal synergy.
Right.
Welcome to a special investigative deep dive for Thrive After 50 Living. We are looking at a massive stack of recent medical research, some really fascinating clinical data, and, the latest endocrinology reports.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack here.
There really is. And our
Yeah.
mission today for you, the listener, is straightforward, but absolutely critical. We want to completely dismantle this flawed, replacement-only model of aging.
Exactly.
And we really need to uncover the exact biological mechanisms that explain why the traditional approach to medicine in your 50s is, well, it's leaving you so profoundly exhausted.
Because that exhaustion you are feeling is real. It is firmly rooted in biology, not in your head. And the data we are unpacking today really represents a fundamental paradigm shift. For decades, standard medical practice has treated the body like a machine with, interchangeable parts.
Like you can just swap something out and you're good to go.
Exactly. But true longevity isn't about treating separate parts in isolation. And it certainly isn't about replacing one missing piece and just hoping for the best.
Yeah, that just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. Aging is an intricate biochemical dance. Right now, the standard establishment is attempting to choreograph that dance by only looking at one dancer at a time. They're entirely ignoring the music, the stage, and the tempo.
That is such a good way to put it, because if the body isn't a simple machine we can just swap parts out of, then we really need to look at the actual gears driving this breakdown.
Right.
To understand how to achieve this biological balance for yourself, we have to critically examine exactly how current medical protocols are basically failing adults over 50. And the research refers to this as the isolated protocol flaw, right?
Yeah, the isolated protocol flaw. It is the defining limitation of modern aging medicine.
Wow.
The medical system at its core was built on an acute care model.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Meaning you identify a single pathology and then you apply a single intervention. So if you have a bacterial infection, you take an antibiotic.
Got it. One problem, one pill.
Exactly. That siloed thinking is deeply, deeply ingrained. So when patients in their 50s complain of, fatigue or low libido, practitioners look at a lab chart, find a single hormone that is dropped below a statistical threshold, say testosterone or estrogen, and they just write a prescription to replace that specific number.
Okay, let's really unpack the mechanics of this replacement-only model. Because to me, it sounds a lot like a mechanic just, topping off the engine oil because the dashboard light came on.
Yes.
But they're completely ignoring that the transmission is failing and the timing belt is snapped.
That's a very accurate analogy.
Right. But if the body functions as an interconnected network, why does replacing that single missing hormone fail so spectacularly to solve the underlying problem?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the body's feedback loops actually respond to that isolated treatment.
Okay.
The biological reality is that isolated symptoms just do not exist.
They don't exist at all.
Right. When a practitioner simply dumps exogenous testosterone or estrogen into your system, they are completely bypassing the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland.
And those are like the master controllers, right?
Exactly. They are the master controllers of your endocrine system. If you introduce a hormone without addressing the underlying environment, the body often reacts defensively.
Defensively? How so?
Well, for example, if your liver and your gut microbiome are sluggish, which is incredibly common in our 50s, you won't metabolize that newly introduced estrogen properly.
Oh,
Yeah, instead of using it, it gets converted into more inflammatory metabolites.
wow. So by just looking at the number on the page and trying to force it up, the practitioner might actually be triggering a cascade of inflammation in your body.
That's exact.
So you aren't fixing the transmission. You're basically just flooding a broken engine with premium gas and wondering why the car is still stalling.
Precisely. You are treating the hormone as if it operates in a total vacuum.
Which it obviously doesn't.
Right. When you manipulate one node
Mm-hmm.
in a highly sensitive network without considering, the receptor site sensitivity or the binding globulins or even the metabolic clearance rate, you aren't solving the problem of aging at all.
You're just making it more complicated.
Yeah, you are usually just masking the decline while simultaneously creating a new, entirely unmanaged imbalance.
That explains the paradox so many listeners experience, doesn't it? They do the labs, they get the creams or the pellets, their numbers look quote-unquote perfect on paper, but they still feel terrible. Which brings us to the next logical question, I think. If focusing solely on sex hormones in these isolated silos is a fundamental mistake, what are the actual forces driving the aging process behind the scenes?
Well, this is where we really have to look past the sex hormones entirely.
Okay.
The standard medical model routinely drops the ball here because it ignores the foundational drivers of your cellular environment. And those are cortisol and insulin.
Right, hidden dictators.
Yes, exactly.
Since our listeners already understand the basics of cortisol as the stress driver and, insulin as the metabolic driver, let's look at exactly how they're interfering with the sex
It's
hormones.
a good idea.
Because the research indicates these two actively dictate cellular aging and metabolic breakdown, yet they are notoriously absent from standard hormone replacement conversations. So how exactly does cortisol, for instance, override testosterone or estrogen?
It comes down to a biological prioritization pathway.
Right.
It's often referred to as the pregnenolone steal.
The pregnenolone steal. Okay, what is that?
So your body uses a master precursor hormone called pregnenolone to make both your sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone and your stress hormones like cortisol.
Ah, so they share the same raw material.
Exactly. Now, when you are in your 50s, you're usually balancing a career, financial pressures, maybe caring for aging parents. Your brain registers chronic stress constantly.
Yeah, I think everyone listening can relate to that.
Right. And biologically, survival always trumps reproduction.
Okay, that makes sense from the evolutionary standpoint.
So the body literally steals that raw material, the pregnenolone, away from the production of vitality hormones. It hijacks it to manufacture more cortisol.
Wow. Okay, so cortisol acts like a sort of emergency override switch.
Yes, exactly.
So let's say cortisol is a fire alarm in your building. All the normal daily operations, like digesting food, repairing cellular damage, or making sex hormones, they immediately shut down because the body thinks it's in a burning building.
That is an incredibly accurate way to look at it.
It's just trying to keep you alive.
Right. And this is exactly why the replacement-only model is so deeply flawed. You can't just pipe in soothing elevator music, meaning, adding an estrogen patch or a testosterone injection, and expect the cellular workforce to just go back to normal while that fire alarm is still blaring in the background.
Because they're panicking. The cells are panicking.
Right. The elevated cortisol is actively downregulating your hormone receptors. It essentially makes the cells completely deaf to the hormones you actually do have.
Oh, wow. They literally can't hear the signal.
Exactly.
And what about insulin's role in this? Because if cortisol is stealing the raw materials and causing the cells to go deaf, how does insulin resistance complicate the picture for someone whose doctor, only checks their sex hormone levels?
Well, insulin acts as the gatekeeper to the cell.
Okay.
When insulin levels are chronically high due to metabolic dysfunction, which is incredibly common as we age and our muscle mass naturally decreases, the cells protect themselves by becoming insulin resistant.
They just lock the door.
Right. But here is the critical mechanism. That resistance doesn't just block glucose. It actively alters the expression of sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG, in the liver.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following the mechanics here, just so we're clear. SHBG is the protein that binds to sex hormones and carries them safely through the bloodstream, right?
Exactly. It's like the transport vehicle.
Yeah.
When insulin is high, SHBG drops.
Okay, so less transport.
Right. Now, that might sound like a good thing initially, because on a lab test, it means you have more free testosterone or free estrogen floating in the blood.
Right, which sounds like what people want.
But it's a trap.
A trap.
Yes.
Yep.
Without that binding protein regulating the delivery, the hormones just clear out of the bloodstream entirely too quickly. Or worse, they convert into unwanted forms,
Unwanted forms like what?
like DHT, or these highly proliferative estrogens that you really don't want accumulating.
Oh, weeks.
Furthermore, the cell membrane itself, which is hardened by insulin resistance, won't even let the hormones efficiently dock at the receptor sites.
So someone could have perfectly normal estrogen or testosterone levels on their lab chart, but because their doctor completely ignored the insulin resistance, those hormones are essentially locked out of the cell.
Exactly.
They're just circulating in the blood, causing mischief, while the cell itself is starving and fundamentally aging.
Yes. I mean, going back to our earlier analogy, the lead singers are on stage, the microphones are on, but the soundboard has been completely unplugged by insulin and cortisol.
That is such a vivid picture.
Your cells are degrading because the metabolic environment is essentially toxic to the utilization of the hormones.
Wow.
This is why standard therapy misses the true drivers of aging. It isn't just a lack of sex hormones destroying your vitality, It is the unchecked chaos of stress and metabolism actively tearing down the cellular infrastructure.
That brings a whole new level of clarity to the frustration so many people feel sitting in a doctor's
Oh,
office.
absolutely.
You are told you're fine, your numbers are fine, you look great on paper, but your biology is effectively shutting down behind the scenes.
It's maddening for patients.
It really is. So now that we understand the mechanics of how cortisol and insulin dictate this aging process, we really have to look at the physical toll this takes on you. What exactly happens to the body when these forces clash with that traditional siloed treatment?
So the research defines this state as systemic imbalance,
Systemic imbalance, okay.
when cortisol and insulin fall totally out of sync with your sex hormones. The primary real-world outcomes for adults over 50 are profound, chronic physical fatigue, and persistent brain fog.
It's just constant exhaustion.
Yes. The cells are literally starved of the ATP energy they need to function, and at the same time, the neuroinflammation in the brain just spikes.
Which means that waking up exhausted isn't a character flaw.
No, not at all.
It's not a lack of willpower, and it isn't just the inevitable result of blowing past your 50th birthday. It is a biological clash happening at the cellular level.
Precisely.
But I want to challenge the treatment side of this because this is where the research we look at gets really alarming.
It does. If a patient goes to their practitioner complaining of this specific brain fog or profound fatigue, and the doctor just treats that single symptom in isolation, are they actually making the underlying systemic imbalance worse?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, yes, they are absolutely making it worse.
How? That seems so counterintuitive.
Let's look at the mechanics of isolated symptom treatment. Say a patient presents with chronic fatigue, and the practitioner prescribes a stimulant, or perhaps just throws a high-dose thyroid medication at them without even checking their cortisol.
Right, just treating the fatigue.
What they are doing is demanding more energy output from an adrenal system that is already completely bankrupt.
Oh, I see. It's like whipping a tired horse. You might get a short sprint out of it, but the crash afterward is going to be devastating.
Exactly. You force a temporary artificial spike in energy. But in doing so, you cause the hormone receptors to downregulate even further to protect themselves from that artificial surge.
So they become even more deaf.
Yes, the underlying cortisol and insulin are still wildly out of sync, so that new intervention just adds more oxidative stress to the entire network.
That sounds dangerous.
It is. Or consider what happens if a doctor blindly raises a testosterone dose to combat fatigue while completely ignoring the patient's severe insulin resistance.
Okay, wait, I know this one. Because the door to the cell is locked by insulin, that extra testosterone just floats in the bloodstream.
Correct. And biology abhors a vacuum.
Right.
That excess, unusable testosterone doesn't just disappear. Through a process called aromatization, the body's fat cells will actually convert that excess testosterone directly into estrogen.
Oh, wow, so it backfires entirely.
Totally. So a man seeking energy and vitality ends up with high estrogen side effects, weight gain, mood swings, and even thicker brain fog.
That is awful.
The isolated treatment essentially acts as a smokescreen. It hides the real mechanical damage while the fire of systemic imbalance just continues to burn down the patient's metabolic health.
The biological domino effect here is just staggering.
It really is.
It makes complete sense why millions of people are trapped in this cycle of going back for more tests, getting more isolated treatments, and just feeling worse year after year.
Yeah, they're stuck.
The old model actively perpetuates the chronic fatigue. It fuels it. So the only logical path forward is to completely abandon that model and embrace the biological reality of the system. Let's dig into the solution.
Okay, the research calls this the paradigm shift toward hormonal synergy.
Hormonal synergy.
Yes. It is the absolute necessity of moving completely away from the flawed model of just chasing numbers on a chart.
It's time to stop looking at the body as a collection of separate parts and start treating it like an interconnected biological symphony.
Yes, a symphony.
Every instrument has to play in key. The cortisol, the insulin, the estrogen, the testosterone, they all have to be reading the same sheet of music.
Exactly right.
But I want to push for some practical reality here, because theory is great, but we need actionable steps. For the listener who has been stuck in that replacement-only loop for years, you know, the person who has been battling this biochemically induced brain fog and fatigue for a decade, maybe, how quickly does prioritizing this synergy actually return that clarity?
That's the real question.
Are we talking days, months, or years for those cell receptors to finally wake back up?
It is a critical question, and we really need to be biologically realistic here. You aren't fixing A decade of systemic imbalance in a weekend.
Right, there's no magic pill.
No magic pill. However, the timeline is highly predictable if you actually address the whole system.
Okay, predictable how?
Well, when you stop chasing the isolated numbers and start down-regulating cortisol while simultaneously improving insulin sensitivity, meaning you finally unlock those cell doors and turn off that fire alarm. The cellular receptors can actually begin to upregulate and regain sensitivity in about 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, so within a month, the deafness of the cells starts to reverse.
Yes,
That's when the hormones already naturally in the body can actually start docking again.
exactly. That is usually when patients notice the first real lifting of the brain fog.
That must feel like such a relief.
Oh, it's life-changing. But true metabolic turnover, where the liver efficiently processes hormones, the gut microbiome stabilizes, and the HPA axis fully resets its stress response, that takes roughly 90 to 120 days.
90 to 120 days.
Okay. The life cycle of a red blood cell is about 120 days.
Wow.
So it takes a committed quarter of a year to fundamentally change the cellular environment.
You really have to give your body that runway.
You do. But the crucial takeaway for the listener is this. The exhaustion is not permanent brain damage. It is simply a symptom of an environment that is radically out of tune.
That is so hopeful.
It is. Once that synergy is prioritized and the metabolic environment is repaired, the return of your vitality is basically a biological inevitability.
I love that, a biological inevitability. That 90 to 120-day timeline is exactly the kind of concrete, actionable science we really try to bring to these deep dives.
It's so important to have realistic expectations.
It is. So let's pull all of these threads together for you as we wrap up today. Throughout this deep dive, we have dismantled the replacement-only model. We've established that treating hormones in isolated silos is a biological error that ignores your complex feedback loops and receptor sensitivities.
And we've also illuminated the true drivers of cellular aging, the cortisol and insulin.
The manager's pulling the strings.
Right. We've seen the mechanisms like that pregnenolone steal and the insulin-driven receptor blocking that explain exactly how stress and metabolic dysfunction override your sex hormones and starve your cells.
And we traced how that systemic imbalance is the actual root cause of the physical fatigue and brain fog that plagues so many adults over 50.
Yep.
Throwing isolated treatments or blind hormone doses at an insulin-resistant, high cortisol system doesn't fix the problem.
No, it creates inflammatory metabolites and causes even deeper crashes.
Because your body is a highly sophisticated, interconnected biological symphony. It is crying out for balance, not just isolated chemical replacements. To achieve true midlife longevity, you have to look beyond the lab chart numbers and demand a synergistic approach to your health.
Absolutely. The medical data is perfectly clear on this. Every single hormone must be evaluated and treated in the context of your entire metabolic and stress environment.
Which leaves us with a really vital concept to carry forward. We have established the internal science of the synergy today. But knowing what we now know about how deeply our hormones react to the world around us, I want to leave you with this. If true longevity requires treating your hormones as an interconnected symphony, responding constantly to both stress and metabolism, what environmental or daily lifestyle noise are you unconsciously exposing yourself to that might be throwing your entire biological orchestra out of tune before the music even begins?